The theme for the afternoon talk with you is the power of calmness and the power of insight. Initially, just to give a general overview of me, and then we'll go into a little bit more of the detail. So there are an immense number and diversity of meditation practices. Many meditation practices, in fact, have a strong emphasis on the calmness element. The exploration and development of calmness through meditation is probably its widest use. That would show itself in obvious examples of mantra. So in the two kinds of mantra, essentially, which are available, one kind is of the repetition of a word, usually of another language, Sanskrit, whatever, and that regularity, perhaps 20-minute periods, longer or shorter in the repetition of it, it does genuinely contribute. The vibration of the mantra, the quiet stating of the word inwardly sends a beneficial response through the being, and the outcome of that, it contributes to more calmness. And that calmness and relaxation is a healthy and very beneficial practice, and obviously has a very, very long history to it. There is also mantra used, and mantra which has the devotional element in it as well. Common example of this might be Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. And so there is a devotion to God, a variety of names, as in the Hindu tradition. It's a reminder too of relationship to God, presence of God in one's life for those who have a devotional nature and may well, as quite often in that tradition, repeat the name of God on the mala, that's a set of beads, and for 108 times, 108 is the number of infinity in the old traditions of India. There are mantras mindfulness practices, but in the calmness elements as well, sometimes through pranayama practices, mindfulness of breathing practices, and much more. There's important and valuable exercises, methods and techniques to contribute to the relaxation of the whole being. And this factor of relaxation, we should never underestimate the depth of significance of it. So though we may arrive here, there may be, not for everybody, some areas of some tension and stress. And that's gradually accumulated there. It may be felt actually in specific areas and locations in the body. Those locations can and do vary a great deal. It is important and valuable for us to be able to recognize and connect when there is some tension, stresses in locations in the body. What are those locations? It may be that there is a certain vulnerability. So for some, it could be the shoulders, obviously. It could be some contractions in the chest. It could be some anxieties, felt as sensations or fears going on in the stomach. It could be in the area of the knees and the ankles. It can be in the hands. It literally can be anywhere. So sometimes there are pressures which are going on in our life. They are going on initially in the world of feeling and thought and states of mind. The feeling and thought and states of mind are unable to accommodate that, and that then expands itself into the intimacy of the relationship of heart, mind, feeling, thought to the body. That then begins to have its influence upon the body. It easily happens as well that with stress and tension, the influence, in this case, on the body also may not be a big enough container for the amount of pressure or stress that a human being is experiencing. When that happens, it then expands into the field of time. What's meant by that, it begins to affect significantly in a negative, unhealthy, and unhelpful way the way we look at the past. So the pressures from the present with the stress and tension then spins over. You can't contain it in the here and now, so then the past is drawn in. If it's not the past, it also can be the future. And the view of the future can be with some fears, anxieties, worries, stress, and much, much more. An all too human situation. And that pressure not only can be with the heart-mind, not only with the body, not only with the past and present, but also and equally there with the arising of the self. So there is the arising of I, that is the arising of the self. And when there is some pressure, when there is something unsatisfactory happening, there easily can be, therefore, another reaction, and it's the reaction of the view about oneself. Disappointment, feelings of failure, not being good enough, losing of some self-worth, a sense of calm and clarity begins to disappear, and the construct of the self, the I and the my, that there is a reaction upon that as well. So mindfulness certainly is a contribution to the relaxation and calmness of the being there. And the clarity, which is the vipassana aspect of this, the insight aspect of this, is to be very, very clear to see what is going on. With the application of the exploration of the calmness of the being there, that the reconnection with it, the remembrance of it, really, it is important that this is applied regularly, that means daily, in the daily life. It is not enough, and it never will be enough, to imagine that one can come on a retreat, find some levels of calmness, some relaxation, some harmony of body and mind, and then leave the retreat and imagine that it will sustain itself simply on the credit or on the merit of having sat 3 or 4 days here. This is called living in dreamland. That the past will not be the resource for calmness of being in the future. It doesn't work like that. And one has to, if you could just close that door behind you, if you don't mind, do let me try this. There. There's a slight environmental dilemma here. The warmth, which is rather warm in the hall due to the good heating system that is there, but then want the cold air, we prefer we reduce the heating with more conservation, and we can keep the closed door. But that's the point. So, in the benefits of the conditions here, I mean, frankly, it would be hard to imagine, except perhaps out in the nature, such a support in the environment here for calmness. You're not talking to each other. That's a great big support to kick off with. The food is just delicious. There is plenty, there's the fields and the greenery, which is all around. There's the Dharma there. The teachings are taking place. There's the practices and the forms. I mean, to be honest, it's a picnic. And therefore, much of what is taking place here is not caused by being here. I'm talking about stress, tensions, and pressure. But, humanly enough, the old is then finding itself, so to speak, landing in the present. What we're doing is dealing with what's been forgotten or neglected or hasn't had the opportunity for some people to arise in the present. With the calmness of being, as mentioned a moment or two ago, one shouldn't underestimate the depths of what that means. An aspect of that, fairly kindergarten, fairly preliminary, is some sense of well-being, of the integration of emotions, feeling, thought too, and the body, and that sense of being quite focused, well adjusted, and no demands being made on the present, nor any demand, so to speak, being made on oneself because of the past. And that is a well-integrated, harmonized human being. It is not to say that is a goal, not to say that's the whole purpose there. This is also just a preparation. And more importantly is that in those moments when we're feeling supportive and very safe environment around us, we're experiencing some experience of being quite calm and content. It can happen, it's one of the vulnerabilities with calmness, that the self, as it were, brings in effort. Oh, I'm feeling so much more calm. I've heard about these other deep experiences, and there is a phenomenal range of them. Teaching to address a reasonable number of them. And then what happens is, with the intentionality and the motive there, is that effort comes in. I want to go deeper. I want to experience more. I want to go deeper into myself. And so the self and the wanting wishes to go deeper. And this self, with the wanting, then places the pressure on the consciousness, on the inner experience, and rather than going deeper, it's the obstruction. It blocks it. And it's in the relaxation of the being, recognizing, as mentioned, what is. That means some of the stresses and tensions that may be taking place for a number. Reducing, all being well, some of the stress of all of that. Allowing the being to settle in. And then it's organic. We, that's you and I, can do, we the self that means, can do so much. Yes, we can make a contribution to reducing stress and tension. We can invite the practices to give us support. We have the benefit of the authority, which is our first experience. We don't need science and neuroscience to confirm any of this. We've got our experience. It's the best authority available to a human being. And this exploration with the experience there, it might, for some, have a sense that one can go deeper. One can, very, very deep, and there is no bottom to this deep. It's infinite. It's not a restricted, limited, finite deep there. So, but then comes a certain kind of trust. And that trust in the calmness of the being is to allow and to be accessible and available to letting things organically go their way. So it's not a case of pushing harder, using a lot of willpower and effort. And it is unfortunate in some of these meditation circles, shall we call them, that one hears, I certainly hope you haven't heard them nor read of them, these kind of heroic, this is quote unquote, heroic, I would say absurd, but others call it heroic, acts of the willpower and of some great yogi or Rinpoche or Ajahn or whoever it might be, what usually he or she, put themselves through and how they, with strong determination, work really hard and push themselves to other levels. And people hear these stories, they read these stories, both past and present, and the mind, being what it is, then compares, well, my God, what he did, what she did, what they did, these great quote-unquote masters there. And then we compare ourselves. One is hardly going to feel inspired in oneself. God, what I'm doing is pathetic. 3.5 days here, or whatever it might, and there, or whatever it might be. Do not be impressed with these huge heroic stories which have infiltrated into the Buddhist and other traditions the last 2,600 years. This is an organic process. It's not an outcome of the will. And some people, unfortunately, in using the will, have damaged their knees, have created such tension and pressure, it's generated psychological disorder and imbalance, and have paid a very high price because they pushed too hard, they sat too long, quite out of touch with their experience. You've got to be mindful in these practices, mindful. And as the Buddha says, if you grab a snake by the tail, you're in trouble. In the mindfulness, I'll switch to the insight in a moment or two area. In the mindfulness of the calmness of the breathing, just to repeat a little bit, it does contribute to a quiet deepening. It also contributes as well to the insights and understanding that come. The Buddha, to his everlasting credit, and for some of us the cream of the milk amongst the meditation teachers, realized the benefits, of course, of mindfulness practices and specifically the calmness various practices, and has made reference to them. But the concern was, it's such a valid concern, the concern was, yes, all of those practices really can genuinely be really, really helpful for a human being there. But what is also needed is some real insight and real clarity intentionally about what is actually happening. One can do, if you take mantra, spent 10 years in the East, so I've done plenty of varieties of mantra practices and to learn and understand their benefits and their limits. And one can engage in these practices. It doesn't mean to say, as an example, that insight cannot come through, but it's so primary on the calming of the breathing, so primary on the devotional element, and other practices to explore calmness. And the Buddha introduced something quite fresh, those the ancient texts, of putting a huge priority on vipassana. It's not a technique, it never has been a technique except in some of the Buddhist traditions. It's never used that way. It's used and expressing itself in our meditations, and in that expression of itself in two particular ways. The emphasis is on the clear comprehension of what is actually happening. Clear comprehension. You might look at your today so far. You might come to the end of a sitting meditation, a walking meditation. And then, because mindfulness includes the past as much as the present, as much as the future. So you might just turn your attention back to this sitting meditation or to the walking meditation. What was the clarity? What was going on in this period? Was there calmness? Was there stress? Was there a story? What was I thinking about? To be extremely clear. And that clarity is has a kind of support for it to contribute to some insight and understanding to come out of it. In your sitting meditations, as an example, you're sitting or walking, standing, whatever. Clearly, every action that we engage in life clearly has a beginning, has a middle, and has an end. And in the beginning, middle, and end of that action, there is a human being with our intentionality to be mindful of. When you walk in here, as an example, to sit, and there's the beginning of the sitting, how is the power of presence? Are you connected with the breath? During the middle period of it, is the energy and interest sustaining itself? In the latter period of it, are you present, staying with it from moment to moment? Or are you waiting for either Ula and I to hit the gong so that hell can be over, or whatever it might be? And sometimes the waiting for it over can be quite a pressure, and it's not unusual. Even the most ardent, dedicated, committed atheist finds herself or himself praying to God for the end of the sitting period because the knees are so uncomfortable, or the mind is so agitated, or whatever. Never imagine for a moment that God won't come into the mind when things are difficult. I don't believe in God, by the way, just using the G-O-D word here, not in the Middle Eastern sense of the meaning of the word. So we have the opportunity, and why is it important? Because look at the number of events in your daily life, important ones. How's the beginning of your day when you arrive at work? What's the middle period of your day? What's the end of your working day like? When the end of your working day comes, is it finished and complete and you walk out and you're not carrying any pictures, any anxieties, any stories about the end of the working day? That's what we're talking about. When you're with your kids, those of you who have kids, and there's the role called the mother and it's called the father. As anybody knows who's a parent, it's no picnic being a parent. There. Anybody who's not a parent sometimes get the idea it is a picnic. So sometimes a mixture of the two. Just spend a little time with kids alone and you'll find out there's a bit of the challenge of being a parent, etc. More importantly, the role of the parent is not continuous, it's a fiction. The role of the parent is when one has the child in front of you, with you, and when you or I were engaged on behalf of. There are plenty of moments, plenty of time, when the role of the parent is not actually functioning, it's not necessary. Many situations. Are we mindful of that? Are we relaxing of that? Are we appreciative of that? Are we missing the kids or whatever? So beginning, the start, the middle and the end, and the Buddha, with the wisdom, put in much emphasis on being very, very clear, in this case about roles, arising, staying and passing, and then re-arising, staying and passing, but very clear about being very aware about the middle period. Let's say you start a relationship. What's the beginning like? What's the middle like? And it's a fair old bet. What's the end going to be like? And the end could be lifelong. Fewer and fewer of those around these days, as we all know. Or it could be that one person has decided, she or he says, thank you, goodbye, enough. The grass is greener on the other side of the fence, and I'm climbing over the fence. There. How is the calmness? Is there the insight? Is the clarity? Whoa, this is just one further expression of the beginning, middle, and end. It's not an illusion. It's not a lie. It's not a fiction. This is life. And so our practice of exploration, of change, of impermanence, of beginning, middles and their endings is a really key feature. Beginning of the breath, the middle of the breath, the end of the breath, and much, much more. If we get the spirit and the exploration of this life, it would be extraordinarily beneficial for our day-to-day life. So one aspect of clear comprehension, as I mentioned just then, is one in which one is really interested in seeing as clearly as possible what is going on here. What do I need to see clearly with this story, or with this daydream, or with this trauma, or with this projection into the future? And the other aspect of vipassana, of insight, clear comprehension is one. Another important and precious aspect to this is insight itself. The Pali word vipassana, a few of you will have heard this word on the grapevine, that passa is the contact, and vi means to double the contact, means something is seen extra clearly. You see it clearly, but you see it extra clearly. And that's seeing something extra clearly, really seeing it clearly. These are rather precious, informative, insightful moments for us, and we need the capacity to recognize. Plenty of times, skillful thoughts may come, for sure. I need to let go of this. And I really need to develop this, to connect with this, to start this, to sustain this, to finish this. The thought arises, but it's got no power. The idea is marvelous, wonderful potential and initiative. And it might arise with regularity. I really would like to, whatever it might be, which could benefit others, could benefit close ones, benefit oneself, or all of that. And the thoughts are arising in the meditations during the day. They're really lovely, sweet, useless thoughts. It gives a nice, to use that frequently used term, feel-good factor. Feel-good factor. Yawn, yawn. Insight, it may come as the thought. Not that thought obstructs insight, not at all. The thought is one way that it can be the confirmation, the affirmation of the insight. But the confirmation or the affirmation, same thing, of the insight is that the insight brings about a change. The rest is fantasy. The rest is a good idea, and sometimes with the good idea, it feels good, but nothing actually happens. And honestly, like some of you work with people like Christopher and the Ula, you connect with them. So some of you, bless your hearts, turn up on the retreats on a fairly regular basis, and will say, in this case myself, I'll say, oh, Christopher, I really feel I really need to, I've been thinking about it, really need to make a change in my life in some direction or other. And occasionally my memory kicks in, not always kicks in. And I might say to the person, didn't you say that to me last year? And the year before? And the year before? And I said, oh yeah. So, when is it going to be a finish being a feel-good thought, a nice, interesting, and when is the transition going to take place when there is the power of insight, which may manifest as a thought, which gives the authority to take the leap into the unknown that you're talking about. And our meditation is not to end thought, it's not the teaching. It's not to find no mind, it's also not the teaching. It's not to stop the mind or empty the mind or empty thought or whatever. It's not in the teaching. But it's to explore in such a way in our relationship to events that when we engage in the mindfulness and the meditations, yes, all being well, there will be some reduction in the level of in the amount of thinking. Some reduction in the amount of thinking that is going on. If your horizontal posture, excuse me, sir, with the glasses, lying on the back, is to sit up rather than the dead have the privilege of the horizontal posture. If you've got backaches, health issues, absolutely welcome to lie down. So sometimes in the exploration there with the thread of the meditations and the mindfulness and the changes, we really want to catch and see as well and as clearly as possible what the insight is. And in the reduction of the thinking process, not the ending, the reduction, we need to remember that every thought, without exception, every thought is a kind of, apart from anything else, a unit of energy. And if we are quietly, which we are, hopefully, reducing the amount of thinking that's going on, it will allow the opportunity for two kinds of thought, valuable thought, insightful thoughts, to stand out. It stands out in the space. It's not just in a long stream of endless, pointless thinking. And the energy, with the reduction of thought, gives the opportunity for some valuable thought to really stand out, in this case as an insight. And that energy, and therefore the thought, has an empowerment to it. If it's really authentic, there will be a response. There will be an action. The voice, if it's the voice, will be found. If it's a creative idea, it will take place. If it's a radical change in one's life, it will happen, because the insight is so clear, and with an authentic insight, frankly, there is no choice. As long as it's interesting, pleasurable, comfortable ideas, of course there's going to be choice. You can spend a lifetime on retreats. Oh, I might do this, but I might do that. What do you think, Christopher? No. And in that, and the other is, if there is thought, and there may be, which is, shall we say, problematic, in which there is an issue, which perhaps you notice yourself thinking a lot about. Too much thinking about, it's called obsessive thinking. Just too much. If we are engaged in the practice of mindfulness, meditation, calmness of the being, reduction of the thought, those unsatisfactory, unhealthy thoughts we obsess about, we preoccupy, those kind of thoughts will, also stand out much more clearly, because they're not lost in a milieu of thoughts circulating around and around and around, in which the nice, good thoughts and the unsatisfactory and unhealthy thoughts are all mixed in with lots of other kinds of thinking. So the encouragement, as you probably pick up with the talk, is in the exploration of this calmness of being, yes, clarity of what is actually happening, yes, some, gosh, I'm just warming up, it's 4:30. Some calmness of the being, yes, some clarity with what's going, yes, and knowing, without all the willpower, knowing that in that there is a receptivity in which, to quote the Buddha here, one finds oneself sometimes getting more clear about two kinds of thought. One kind of thought, that which is healthy, insightful, beneficial, worth seeing, worth reflecting upon as a real contribution to change. And we'll be very, very clear about those kind of thoughts which can have unhealthy intentions in them, can be feeding addictions, reactivity, negativity, positivity, thoughts about oneself which are reactive, etc. So where there is some space in the being, in relationship to thought, those two kinds of thoughts will begin to stand out much more clearly because they're not lost in millions of thoughts. And when it's the unhealthy ones, the problematic ones, which will be extremely familiar to you, and never new, it's all in the old. The clarity then is, okay, what am I going to do about this? What is it that I need to understand here? Do I need to share this with the other? In this case here, the meditation teachers. What would be a different view or attitude with regard to these kinds of thoughts? So there is no ignoring of them. There's really a recognition, honestly and truly, this is what is happening in these unhealthy thoughts. And parallel and importantly as well, this relationship to thought, which is valid. Sometimes it comes as a single sentence, or a kind of the word. And to use the Christian mystics, it's surely true. If you like the religious language, I rather like it. The word is with God. And it can be that in the depth of the being and in the real variety of experiences which are accessible and available, sometimes, for those who don't like the word God, in one ear and out the other. But for those of us who rather like the regular use of the word, and the Buddha used it very regularly, by the way, Brahma means God. Sometimes God speaks to us. You just got to make sure we're listening. And if you're really uncomfortable with G-O-D, and you prefer reference to D-O-G, dog, that's fine as well. So sometimes out of the depth of the being, dropping the word God, it's the same thing, out of the depth of the being, something touches us. And it can genuinely, in precious and in liberating ways, actually change our life. And it's worth the mindfulness and the meditations, the reflections, the practices, the variety of aches in the shoulder, stresses, knee pains, and the mantra common in the meditation, oh, what am I doing here? Often far more successful than Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. So sometimes we watch these mantras in our own mind arise and pass and come and go. We have a sense, whoa, can be more receptive to something other. And for that, every moment on the meditation cushion, every mindful step, walking up and down on this earth, in this very short life that we have on this earth. And if we can keep steady with all of this, no matter what information comes to us about anything, and sometimes it's difficult and painful, we can find ways to live one day at a time. And as the Buddha commented, better to live one day a mindful, clear, receptive life than to live 100 years and sleepwalk through it. Let's have our quiet minute together, shall we please? Thank you. beings may all beings explore the power of calmness. May all beings explore the power of clear comprehension and insight. May all beings be receptive to what is profound. Thank you everyone for lending an ear.